The International Trade Council is a 64-year-old non-profit peak body chamber of commerce. Our members include government trade and investment agencies. Those might be national. In fact, I see James York from Enterprise Estonia is with us today, or regional. Someone else also with us today from Opportunity New Brunswick, which is a regional investment agency of New Brunswick in Canada. Also chambers of commerce and business associations and businesses across a broad range of industries. The council has offices in 16 countries and members in 179 countries. So let's look at the current global situation. Before we do, I'll introduce you to a few key words that you might be hearing in the media recently. So I'm sure everyone's been hearing the word epidemic, endemic and pandemic lately. So an epidemic is a disease illness that occurs at a constant but often low level within a certain population. So that might be chickenpox within the USA, it might be malaria in Africa or parts of Asia, it might be Chaga disease in South America. An epidemic is a disease that affects a significantly larger population or larger than is expected and is usually confined to a specific area. A pandemic is when an epidemic goes global. So we were hearing in late December 2019 about an emerging epidemic, nCoV-19, or a novel coronavirus, now known as nCoV-19, which has graduated to the point where it is become a pandemic. Now, of course, this isn't our first major respiratory outbreak. It is one of many, and the fatality rates and the infection rates of which are varied across the last century. So that's spanning from the Spanish flu, which killed between 20 to 50 million and had a fatality ratio of about 2%, through to SARS, which again originated in China, had a fatality ratio of less than 10%, but a worldwide mortality rate of less than 1,000. And now, of course, today, nCoV-19, which has a fatality ratio documented between 2.3 and 3.4%, and a worldwide mortality rate of around 4,300 as of today. Now, how infectious is this disease? Well, there's quite a lot of difference in opinion about this, but generally speaking, those who have been diagnosed, who have passed away, there is a higher mortality rate in older age groups, 80s plus 14%, 70s plus 8%, 60s plus 3.6%, and then a significant drop-off in the younger population. The mortality rates are actually much likely to be lower than noted above and lower than noted by the media, insofar that we don't know how many are actually infected. Mortality rates also differ by geographic region. So in the original infected population in Wuhan, the rates were around 6.8%. In other cities in China, the rates dropped to about 3%. There was a variation in rates between males and females, about 58% in males versus 42% in females. But again, that could be a social issue. Infectious rates could also be just a reporting issue. Younger people are seem to be more likely to be asymptomatic. Older people seem to be more likely to have visible symptoms and therefore seek out medical advice, which will increase the reporting and change the mortality rate, and ultimately the infection rates will change as well. So at the end of the day, we really don't know how many people are infected globally or by country. It is anyone's guess, and there's quite a lot of variation of opinion on it. But we do know that those who report that they are ill or have been tested as being ill, the mortality rate in under 50s is very low. In fact, it's very similar to what we see in the seasonal flu. And seasonal flu worldwide kills approximately 300,000 people every year. So current status as of 11th March, total reported cases close to 120,000, deaths reported 4,300, and recovered is about 66,000. Again, interesting to note that China, while it has a large number of cases, the number of cases per 1 million people is only 56, whereas Italy, the cases per 1 million people is 167. Again, it can go back to a reporting issue potentially, in that China has a younger population than Italy. Population age difference in Italy, so the average population age is different, average lifespan is slightly different, reporting mechanisms are slightly different. So the variations we see here on this table may be a statistical anomaly by country. It may be a reporting issue by country as well. So now that we've given our brief background and overview of where we're at, let's look at how we identify risks from the novel coronavirus, nCoV-19, that are going to affect organizations globally. We've broken this down into 4 key areas: employees, supply chain, customers, and leadership. Now, of course, not all disruptions are due to real threats or real situations that have impacted your business directly. You may not have a sick employee. You may not be located in a place where there is a sick employee. But media has a great deal of influence on populations, and perception of threats can equally interrupt and impact your organization. We're already seeing panic buying in countries such as the United Kingdom. We recently ran a survey in the US with the Manufacturers Association that indicated something like 48% of manufacturers were impacted by supply chain issues due to perceived threats rather than actual threats. Similarly, in the United Kingdom, 24% of retailers were impacted by perceived threats due to panic buying in a great number of cases due to nCoV-19. And only 7% of those actually had a contingency plan in place and alternative suppliers in place, which is potentially a very large problem. So first issue we'll discuss is employees. So the risk for employees, of course, is absenteeism. How do you resource your business if your employees are absent because of illness? They may also be absent just because of health and safety issues. You have someone else in your office who is ill, or you have potential interactions with customers who might come in contact, and your employees have decided that themselves, that health and safety issue, they're going to stay home. You might have decided that they're going to stay home, or a combination of any of those two. The impact of that, of course, is that it might cause delivery problems for your product or service to your own customers. Another impact that can cause that a lot of people haven't necessarily thought of yet is knowledge management. So the potential loss of administrative or technical expertise from employees taking leave or employees getting sick is quite high. One person in your organization, if you're a small organization, might have a key password or a key access to key records, or maybe has not updated key records as they ought to have, and suddenly you're scrambling to provide that information to someone else, or you're scrambling to access those records yourself for your business. Another impact, of course, is human resources. Bringing on additional staff, having your staff have to cover other people's jobs, potential staff layoffs in the event of financial difficulties, healthcare and insurance of your employees, and also infrastructure. So you might need to consider additional infection control procedures, possible changes in the way employees get to work, so telecommuting, and equipment maintenance. You might find absenteeism has a direct impact on equipment maintenance when key personnel are no longer available and backup personnel either haven't been adequately briefed, do not have access to the knowledge to maintain the equipment necessary, or do not have the appropriate tools to do so. The next section that we must all consider is supply chain. So there's supply chain broken down into product providers and service providers. There are already lead time issues, as I originally identified. Those lead time issues can also fall into quality control issues. So organizations might address lead time issues by sourcing other suppliers or going to their original suppliers who are substituting products, who are not adequately checking products or have inadequate support for the products that they're delivering you, which will have an onflow to your own deliverability to other customers. Of course, there's outright supplier unavailability in some areas, and there's outright product availability in some areas, particularly when there's panic buying that's already occurring. There's also issues of transportation delays and cancellations, as we've seen with China, airlines flying in and out, freight movements being delayed. So all of this means in supply chain, we must start considering supply chain diversity, and particularly geographical diversity. And we should start mapping our supply chain and our suppliers' supply chains as well. Customers also have a direct impact on businesses during times of pandemics, insofar as that demand changes. Demand might increase in some areas, basics, and it might decrease in other areas, so tourism, hospitality, luxury goods, consumer wants rather than needs. Customer deliverability is also an issue in that some businesses may struggle to meet existing timeframes and existing contracts, and some customers might delay purchase orders or increase their timeframes or increase their quantities of orders or decrease their quantities of orders accordingly. And of course, there's a risk of leadership. So the availability of management and business continuity plans for management, the ability for management to delegate accordingly within their organization, and communication with stakeholders from the management that will continue to promote trust and responsibility and continue to provide leadership to all stakeholders within their organization and externally. So we'll go over some suggested actions that we keep bringing up with people. Employees. So one of the first things that we need to do is map all risks associated with potential employee absences. So those risks could be increased expenses, changes in business processes. We need to either bring on extra staff to cover absenteeism, or we need to use existing personnel to cover other people's jobs. So the next is we need to document all the systems that our staff have access to and all of the key knowledge that all of our staff have access to ensure that there's no single point of failure because one of our staff is absent. We should also review and update all processes, all operational documents, and all security documents, because a single point of failure can, as I said before, might be as simple as a lost password or a undocumented process that now someone is struggling to retrieve. Reviewing and updating all knowledge management systems is also very important, and we should also ensure that those knowledge management systems have redundancies built into them. It would would be great to put everything in a knowledge management system and then lose access to that knowledge management system because we've forgotten the person responsible for that entire process themselves has gone off sick or is unavailable for a period of time. We should also review and update our employee communication plans so we ensure that all stakeholders are identified and involved, and we need to implement risk mitigation strategies for our employees. So work from home options, travel restrictions, health insurance options, etc. From an administrative point of view, all organisations should consider reviewing their pre-existing purchase orders. Now, in this, I say pre-existing purchase orders, but there's a specific clause we should all be looking for, and that's our force majeure clauses. Not all force majeure clauses are alike. Most clauses you'll find refer to acts of God, acts of war, and acts of certain third parties. But only some clauses include labour shortages, and labour shortages might be an indirect impact of a virus, and that indirect impact directly affects production or service provision, but it might not be included in the force majeure clause. So a supplier of yours might be obligated to supply because that's not part of the inclusion, or might not be obligated to supply, where you might be obligated to supply yourself because your documents do not match. So that follows on to our next point, which is reviewing all pre-existing sales orders. You should look at your own force majeure clauses and update your contracts accordingly. If you expect to have coronavirus issue impact your ability to perform, then you should also inform your customers in advance, because this might strengthen your position in subsequent litigation, even if you are going to be perceived as liable. Where possible, you should change your contract wording, specifically including pandemics and epidemics in force majeure. You should all consider reviewing all insurance policies for the entire organisation. That's travel, delivery, trade finance, freight, everything. And you need to implement a communication plan that covers your customers, staff, and all other stakeholders. So supply chain, we recommend that organisations audit their own suppliers' risk management strategies. It's great to have a supplier that appears to be perfectly sound, able to supply, is continuing to supply, and then you find out that they have key elements that they do not have redundancies for, and those key elements are critical to your own organisation's ability to function. So we do recommend that organisations request copies of risk impact assessments or risk mitigation summaries from their own suppliers. One, to put your mind at ease about your supplier's ability to continue, and also this might help with contract renegotiation if necessary. Because if you look for alternative suppliers, you might find that some of your current supply contracts have exclusivity clauses, particularly if you have preferential pricing off a supplier, or you're part of a long-term delivery contract, you might be tied into a single supplier. Now, if you feel that there is a risk that your supplier is not going to deliver and you've been unable to access their own risk mitigation documents and the risk impact assessment at this point in time, then this can help you negotiate allowing you to introduce additional suppliers into your supply chain, competitive suppliers, even if it's only for a limited window of time. So do look for alternative suppliers, but check your agreements for exclusivity. If there is exclusivity involved, then go back and renegotiate with your exclusive suppliers, asking them for a window of time to allow additional suppliers into your supply chain. And also, when you're doing that, you should consider geographical redundancy of your suppliers. It's great to have a different supplier in the same city and also able to meet the same deadlines as your other supplier, but then you find that both of those suppliers are purchasing back from the same base themselves, which would ultimately have an impact on you. Geographical diversity is probably one of your best options. Another benefit from geographical diversity is you can potentially benefit from pricing arbitrage. Something that impacts a supply chain in one location may not impact a supply chain in another location, so pricing may differ between two locations. It might be beneficial for you to consider geographic redundancy of your suppliers. So, and your suppliers, by the way, might be service providers as well as physical suppliers, of course. We also recommend that companies start reviewing their customer purchasing trends. So you need to consider how changes in demand are going to impact your organization. Those changes might be positive, those changes might be negative, but what will the impact be on your organization? And can you introduce additional products or services that replace other products or services that have high deliverability risks? Can you upsell other products or services that will keep you going for a period of time? And can you reward your existing customers for loyalty for staying with you? Ultimately, at the end of the day, situations like this are a negotiation with people. Contracts aside, the more you communicate with your suppliers and the more you communicate with your customers, the better the outcome will be for everyone. So you really need to strengthen your customer communication. You need to talk about deliverability. You need to talk about serviceability, timeliness, and warranties. And you should be sharing your own risk impact assessments, even one-page summaries with your customers on a regular basis, and if anything changes, updating those risk impact assessments so that they understand where you are at. And from a financial perspective, this normally goes without saying. People should be looking at wastage within their organizations, reducing costs, deferring unnecessary expenses, so potentially renegotiating with your suppliers where it's possible. Again, look at your force majeure clauses. Understand that other suppliers are also facing challenges in their own supply chains, and see what you can do to defer your orders if necessary, or defer payment on your orders if necessary. That might also go back to trade financing agreements, additional insurance if necessary on trade financing agreements. There's a variety of ways to defer your expenses with existing suppliers. And looking for alternative revenue sources. It would be during moments of adversity, there is always opportunity. So there is always investment opportunities during adverse periods throughout history. If you are in an industry that is going to be adversely affected by this current pandemic, then you should consider diversification of your revenue streams. Perhaps in some industry that you know similarly that is compatible with your current business but is not in the same exact sector as your current business. You should also consider new sales opportunities, so bringing on additional lines that might be complementary to lines that you're offering, or additional partnership opportunities, teaming up with other organizations that have the same challenges as you but are complementary to you. And of course, you should be looking for pricing arbitrage, looking at opportunities to source in other geographic locations at different prices or preferential prices, so that you can take advantage of the situation. On a government level, we recommend particularly larger organisations or appoint someone to monitor regulatory actions of the government. That's not just local regulatory actions of the government. You really need to monitor the regulatory actions of your suppliers in all jurisdictions. Forgetting to monitor the regulatory actions of your supplier based in Vietnam or your supplier based in Germany, and one day finding out that they cannot ship to you is a potential problem. You also need to monitor regulatory actions in customer jurisdictions to ensure that you can deliver to your customers, to ensure that, to update your sales forecasts and delivery forecasts and human resource and operational plans as necessary. You also have to determine what these new regulatory actions will have on your business in the long term. Is it going to shut down parts of your business, shut down certain lines of your business, suspend shipments to your business or from your business? Is it going to ban travel to and from? And in leadership, all organizations should be updating their succession plans. They should be implementing a clear succession plan. They should be communicating that succession plan with key stakeholders and ensure the appropriate authorizations are in place so that the people who need to take over are there, and those people who take over are skilled, have access to updated knowledge base information, and have access to the right tools, even if other people in the organization are not currently available. So in saying all that, I'll just briefly touch on some common risk management strategies that companies use generally. This is Risk Management 101, so I'm sure most people are already aware of this. So organizations can either assume/accept risk. This is typically done when, after reviewing all of your potential risks in your organization, you realize that there's a minor impact or minor likelihood that this risk is going to happen. Therefore, you accept that it's a risk and do nothing about it. You acknowledge its existence and move on. Other option might be that the risk is unlikely, but the costs to mitigate that risk are exceptionally high. And not everyone has the ability to put in redundant power supplies to their office. Not everyone has the ability to hire additional security. Not everyone has the ability to, bring on additional engineers to fix certain things that might break down. And they're willing to accept that risk because the likelihood is low or the cost of mitigation of that risk is very high. Second, you can try and avoid risk wherever possible, which is preferential. Adjusting your purchasing requirements or adjusting constraints to eliminate that risk. That's typically accommodated by changing your technical requirements. So your supplier in one jurisdiction, you've given them certain technical requirements, but you're able to get away with different technical requirements from a compatible supplier in a different jurisdiction because they might not be able to meet the exact requirements, but overall it's going to work anyway. You might change your own scheduling, you might change your own funding and investment position as well. You can attempt to control the risk, so you can implement actions that are going to minimize the impact or the chance of a risk happening. Again, supply chain diversity comes into that, geographical supply chain diversity comes into that, renegotiating supply and delivery agreements as well. Again, look at your force majeure portions of your agreements, both with your customers and your suppliers, and proactively handling HR issues. So absences, ensuring all the knowledge in your organization is documented well, ensuring your operational plans are updated, ensuring your risk management plans are updated, allowing staff to telecommute to the office where possible, and updating your insurance policies. And finally, transferring risk. So if it is possible, you can reassign the risk to another organization. So you can either transfer the risk to your customer by changing your terms and conditions and keeping your customer informed if that is possible, or you can work with your suppliers to transfer some of the risk on to them as well, or at least sharing some of the risk more with your suppliers. So I'll touch on how the International Trade Council can assist in organisations in this endeavour. So some of the key services related to the current situation that we've been providing organisations are contract review and advice. So we have our own internal legal review team that regularly reviews contracts for organisations. One of our members is on this webinar today, Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. We regularly review contracts for them on an ad hoc basis. We escalate those to appropriate specialists where required, and if ultimately required, we can also provide referrals to trusted third-party lawyers or third-party advisors. We also offer a supplier sourcing service. So as a non-profit Chamber of Commerce, we are agnostic, we're independent, we don't charge commissions for sourcing. We can source from across the globe, and for organisations that are struggling to find alternative suppliers, this is an excellent service for them. Next is due diligence. So for those suppliers, we can provide due diligence. We can check histories of those suppliers, the deliverability of those suppliers. We can also check their own risk impact and risk mitigation materials, and we can also check potential customers as well. We can also help organisations mediate with suppliers and customers, which is particularly beneficial if there's a requirement to renegotiate a contract or there's something particularly difficult, sticking point between the supplier. Exclusivity tends to be one of those sticking points. A supplier cannot deliver, they're going to invoke force majeure, but they do not want you necessarily to go and find an alternative supplier. That tends to be a big problem, which can be resolved generally through mediation. And it does help to have a third party assist in that. And where we cannot assist, we can also bring in additional support from our members and external third parties. We also keep our members up to date on any regulatory changes as they happen. NCOV-19 is, of course, a moving target. The answer to most questions, it depends. What happens if my supplier does this? Well, it depends. Tell us more information about it. Let's look at what the actual current regulatory status is. Let's look at the economics of how it's going to impact your business, and look at the economics of what we can do to alleviate some of that risk. We also do provide ongoing education. So webinars such as this are free to our members and free to external organisations. We provide independent advisory, and we also provide online courses for upskilling members and their employees. Our online courses are also free to our members and all of their employees. We have a 24-hour business support service where if we cannot answer something internally, we can also escalate it to trusted third-party providers worldwide. We also assist organisations with investment diversification, so locating opportunities globally, and again, that is non-commissionable, so it's not the same thing as using a business broker to buy a business, to look for investment, to receive introductions, and we can provide due diligence on those introductions as well, because we are independent and we are unbiased in our advice. And we also have a new market introduction service. So again, diversity breeds opportunity, where organisations have the chance to bring in a new service or a new product, or even just retain customers by rewarding existing customers. We can assist them in doing that. We can help them locate new partners. We can help them locate new distributors, new buyers. We can introduce them to investment opportunities. We can introduce them to the right government agencies in different jurisdictions. We also run trade missions regularly every year, normally between 6 and 8, so that we can handhold people, and they can also meet other CEOs who have similar challenges to them and collectively work together to resolve those similar challenges. And we provide ongoing technical assistance for technical barriers to trade, so tariffs, existing and new regulations, and so on. I see that word is cut off in my PowerPoint. So for all organisations, if they're not a member, we invite you to join, certainly. And I think Ron's now going to pass this open for question and answers. But before he does, I also must note that we do have some upcoming trade missions. These are trade investment missions and procurement missions, particularly for those interested in supply chain diversity. Baltics is a good region. Baltics and Nordic region is a very good region to look for alternative suppliers, given low cost and high skills and high level of quality. So we have a trade mission going to Malta on the 20th to the 22nd of April. We have a trade mission to Finland, 25th to 27th of May, and then Estonia, 28th to the 30th of May. I'm well aware that during coronavirus, current pandemic, a lot of organisations are restricting travel, but the counterpoint to that is that a lot of organisations do need to look at alternative sources of supply, do need to look at alternative diversification of revenue streams, and ourselves and our partner government investment agencies are more than happy to handhold people right up to the point of the trade mission, have them attend the trade mission and handhold them afterwards. If there's any delay in these trade missions, we'll certainly keep people informed, but at the moment that's not the case. So I think my colleague Ron has fallen asleep.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So now what I will do is I will going to run a poll. So I hope that all answer the poll. And also we will start a Q&A now. So on the Q&A tab, you can type in your question. There's already a question that was typed in during the presentation, so Kristen will be happy to answer those questions. So just please keep posting your question, and he'll be happy to answer the question for you. So I'm showing here that about the presentation. Yes, this presentation is can be sent, and also this webinar is currently recording. Also send a copy of our recording. So the first question here is, how do we request assistance with suppliers sourcing from various countries from ITC?
Okay, so to answer that question, you can email any of our trade commissioners. I think I put the email address up on the previous page, but you can email our general information box if you're not our member, info@tradecouncil.org. Generally, supplier sourcing is only available for our members because along with supplier sourcing tends to be supplier due diligence, particularly to ensure that they can deliver in time.
Okay, so most of the questions here are about the slides. So yes, we can send a copy and also the recording as well. So for the email address, there's an email address posted on the presentation right now. Any other questions? I have one here. So I have a contract in Sierra Leone as consultant for supervising a rural electrification project. Oh.
Okay. I am from India. So what is the question itself? Are you asking about, you would like to get the contract reviewed? That's no problems. So if you're an ITC member, you're welcome to contact your trade commissioner. They will review both the contract and also the supplier, also the customer as well, to ensure that the customer is financially viable, that the customer exists, and so on. How about the application of the force majeure contract? Yes, so in particular, we were happy to review the force majeure contract in all agreements because it's something that comes up quite regularly. Deliverability of your contract in Sierra Leone might ultimately depend on changing personnel in your own organization. It might ultimately depend on government regulations or regulatory changes, restrictions on travel, etc. So that is why your force majeure portions of your contract need to be updated.
Next question from Cassandra.
No, I don't think that that puts you in a place of liability. I think that's an excellent idea, putting together individual care packets to provide employees. As long as you document that this is something you're doing and you ensure that you're in compliance with the law. I mean, there's a lot of concern about health and safety at the moment because employees may just decide that they don't want to come to work. Whether or not that's a legitimate concern of theirs or a perceived concern of theirs may be irrelevant at the end of the day if they have a health and safety concern. So the more you can do to show that you're proactively working with those employees to alleviate their concerns and help them, the better it is for you in the long term. For small businesses already impacted by cancellations, are you aware of any US government resources that will be offering low-cost loans to help cover business costs until revenues return to normal? Sheldon, I'm not sure. At this stage, we will wait and see. Because the number of businesses directly impacted by the coronavirus in terms of illnesses within those businesses is low, there hasn't been government resources allocated towards it as far as I'm aware yet. Small Business Administration is an organisation I'm in touch with daily. So with the US Department of Commerce, also a lot of the district export councils across the US, and I haven't heard of anything, but that might change. As I said, it's an emerging situation. I would like to know how to get my letter of invitation for Finland if it's going to be held due to this coronavirus. Right, so attendees for any of our trade missions, once they register for a trade mission, we do provide a letter of invitation for them. They present that to the embassy together with their visa application. If there is going to be a change in any of our trade missions, then we will inform our delegates. But for trade missions and all international travel, of course, we recommend travel insurance. One of the issues with travel insurance, though, is that the coronavirus is now a known event, which means that if you do have travel insurance and your staff are traveling, you cannot just cancel your trip because you want to. If the airline cancels the trip or the government closes the borders or decides it's not going to accept people, then that's different. Then that's quite easy to claim the travel insurance back. But you cannot just cancel for any reason. So that's something you should think about. My colleague in Enterprise Estonia, of all things, just advised me that the administration just announced that businesses with fewer than 100 employees could be eligible for an interest-free loan of up to $75,000 as long as they can document a 25% loss in customer receipts because of the coronavirus in New York City. So there you go. That's Mayor de Blasio's administration in New York offering financial relief. And I'm sure we'll see many more relief packages like this come along. Let me have a look if there are any other questions.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, okay, we'll wait.
Have someone said yes, they have another question.
Okay, waiting for your question.
Oh, already typed in. I haven't seen your question, Frank.
Yes, I don't see the question, Frank.
I can't seem to locate your question, Frank. Would you mind typing in again? All right, while Frank's typing this in, just let everyone know that there is going to be a copy of the slides available. We will send it within the next 24 hours to all people. Okay, what is the likelihood that international freight will be halted? Will ships be turned away or just held at the port at all? This is from Michael. I don't think all international freight will be halted. Certainly that seems to be, at this point in time, not going to happen. The coronavirus doesn't seem to stay on surfaces longer than a few hours. So it doesn't seem as though a ship will be turned away at port, a ship containing freight. It might be that there are disinfectant, additional quarantine measures and disinfection measures as a result of personnel handling that freight. But most freight handling is automated. So in terms of deliverability of freight, it would not necessarily be that it's going to be turned away or held at a port unreasonably. It might be held at a port because of lack of personnel, lack of clearance personnel, reassignment of duties. It might be held at a port because it might just be mandatory to quarantine goods for a certain period of time coming from a certain country. I don't believe that that's a reasonable procedure to take. But it's much more likely that goods are going to be delayed because your suppliers are unable to ship, your carriers are unable to carry, there are holdups in port due to personnel and staffing issues. What is the likelihood, when will the economy recover? Any idea? Honestly, no idea. We don't even know the number of people infected, and we don't really know the recovery rate or the mortality rate caused by the disease. Life will go on ultimately. Businesses will recover. Those businesses that are proactive in maintaining good communication with all their stakeholders, those businesses who are proactive in supply chain diversity, in managing their employee risk and implementing good leadership management practices are going to be those who survive. Okay, so Frank wrote, but for today, tomorrow, what disruption is already in motion? So the question is, how does ITC members work to mitigate the impact of these disruptions? What are low-hanging solutions that ITC members can adopt ASAP to deal with the impact of disruptions? So first, in order of priority, from my personal point of view, I think that organizations should immediately address their knowledge management issues. It's something that most people don't address until it's far too late. You need to document everything within your organization that only one person has access to. The smaller the organization, potentially it seems to be much more likely that one person will have access to this and no one else, and that will cause a major disruption down the line. That can be access to customer contracts, it can be access to IT systems, it can be access to accounting records, HR records. You need to ensure that the knowledge is retained within the organization in the case of absences or in the case of organizational departures. I would say that's the first thing that is key for everyone. The second thing that is key for everyone is looking for alternative sources of revenue and reducing your expenses. You can do that through supply chain diversity and looking at other alternative investment options, particularly if you're in an industry where you know that there are going to be challenges for the foreseeable future. Obviously, travel and leisure are one of those industries, but there are always opportunities for organizations no matter what. So we've seen lots of hotels turn into from renting out rooms to travelers through to renting out rooms to healthcare personnel to being used as quarantine facilities to we've seen that entertainment isn't a sector that is necessarily going down. Cinema entertainment might be, but there is an increase in home entertainment and computer game usage and access of internet from home. So every period of difficulty, there are always opportunities for organizations.
Okay.
Do you have any more questions?
Any more questions? There's one from Naveen.
I need to understand, can we take a loan from other countries without bank guarantee? We pay interest rate of around 11% in India. It is possible to use trade finance from international trade finance suppliers, certainly. A lot of Indian companies use trade finance companies that are based in Singapore, for example, and have varying rates of interest. But if you can take a bank loan itself, not related to particularly a trade finance deal, that might be a different challenge. Depends on the size of your organization and it depends on what guarantees are available. And depends who you're approaching. An international bank or trade finance organization is much more likely to be able to offer a loan to an organization that's not based in their home country because they're able to collect on the collateral if in the event of default of that loan. A smaller organization might not be able to, but certainly there are options for businesses to be able to take loans internationally, yes. Any other questions?
Any other questions? I think that's it.
Okay, I think that's it, Ron.
Yep. Anything else, Kristen? Okay. So thank you so much, guys, for attending the webinar today. And again, if you have any question, the address is presented on the PowerPoint right now, and please expect to receive the copy of the PowerPoint and the recording within 24 to 48 hours. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to attend the webinar today. You all have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Thank you.